Good morning. I'd like to call the October 10th, 2025 meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission to order and welcome commissioners, invited speakers, and members of the public for joining our meeting today. We appreciate your interest. Jen, would you like to just please remind folks how to use WebEx?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to those who are new. As always, we'll be using WebEx today. As a panelist, you're able to unmute and mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon, as well as the video icon. Also, please keep in mind that your comments are public and the public can see the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Just next slide, please. Today, the bulk of our meeting will really be focused on the transformative integrated greenhouse gas emissions reduction analysis that ODO has been working on our behalf. This is a follow-up to a study that we did in 2023 and helps us track progress towards our emissions reduction goals in the sector-based emissions. And we really appreciate all of the great work that staff and our consultants have done on that topic. In advance of that, we'll talk a bit, we'll do some updates. We have some substantial updates to talk about at the meeting, and then talk more specifically about an intent to create a committee of the commission to help dig in deeper on one of our key deliverables this next year on natural climate solutions. So that's kind of the high-level overview of our meeting. We'll close with next steps and future meeting topics following at the end of the meeting, as well as take public comments if we have any. I just, for my updates, I wanted to just make sure folks were aware of Governor Kotek's Executive Order 20-25, which was released on Monday, entitled Accelerating Wind and Solar Energy Development in Advance of Elimination of Federal Clean Energy Tax Credits. This executive order really speaks to the discussion that we had in August as part of the agenda item focused and presented by the U.S. Climate Alliance on the impacts of federal changes in climate policy. It's great to see the governor's leadership on this important issue. If you haven't had a chance to review the executive order, please do. We'll just also note that we will be prioritizing the ability to bring renewable energy projects online and kind of broader transmission issues at an upcoming commission meeting likely to occur in January. I also wanted to return briefly to the conversation that we had in September about expanding our engagement with tribes in Oregon. And in particular, I wanted to thank Oregon tribes and staff and consultants with the Affiliated Tribes of the Northwest Indians, ATNI, that they all did to develop an engagement strategy for the commission on our natural climate solutions work. ODO staff are pursuing the idea of expanding the strategy so that it could encompass all the commission's work in partnership with tribes and ATNI. So we're hoping that we might be able to think about what the strategy would look like if we were really kind of looking across all the issues that are important to tribes and a part of our commission's responsibilities. I also wanted to note that ATNI hosts 3 convenings of the tribes in the Pacific Northwest a year. Among other things, the purpose of these meetings are to exchange information on mutual areas of concern, develop consensus on policy recommendations and positions on key issues, and to provide technical assistance to tribes. And I would like to encourage commissioners to attend the gathering, to continue to build our understanding of climate-related issues of importance to tribes in Oregon. And Jeff will provide more information to commissioners on the winter gathering, which happens, I think, the third week of January as it becomes available. So I hope folks will consider that. We also plan to invite Shana McConville-Radford, Governor Kotek's Tribal Affairs Director, to join us at a later meeting to talk about broader steps the state's taking to expand engagement with federally recognized tribes in Oregon. The state of Oregon and the tribes recently held a government-to-government meeting, just actually Wednesday and Thursday this week. And I know a number of agency directors attended that meeting, and would love to hear any comments from those who attended on the gathering and some of the key takeaways. So with that, I'll open the floor to any thoughts agency directors might want to share.
Chair McDonald, this is Janine.
Thank you, Director Benner.
And I'm happy to share a few takeaways from the Tribal Summit. It was a really great gathering, and the title of the summit, the theme of it was, "In a time meant to divide us, we gather." And so there was just a lot of appreciation for being in community, in person with state agency directors. I got to see Director Bateman there. And tribal members, and it's always a good reminder of the sovereign nature of tribal governments in Oregon and the commitments that the state has made to consult with tribes on actions that affect them. And it's always a great opportunity as well. And I usually take away just a reminder of the indigenous knowledge and everything that we can learn about natural resource management from the tribes that have been, working on these lands and living on these lands for time immemorial. So there was, in my individual conversations with tribal leaders, there was a lot of interest in energy and energy sovereignty, and discussion of the impacts to our state from climate change. So I'm glad to hear about the increased engagement the Commission is seeking with tribes. And
Thank you, Director.
Sure. Before I turn it over to Director Bateman, one quick announcement I wanted to make is that this past Tuesday, ODA opened an opportunity announcement for grid resilience grants. We have $11.5 million available for Oregon's electric utilities to support projects that strengthen the resilience of the grid. So this is the second round of funding, originating with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021, and it's for projects including weatherization technologies and equipment, fire-resistant technologies, fire prevention system, utility pole management, undergrounding of electric equipment, all stuff that will hopefully make our state more resilient.
Great. Thank you, Director Benner. Director Bateman, do you want to add any thoughts about the summit?
Thank you. Thank you all. Good morning. Brenda Bateman, Director of Department of Land Conservation and Development. And I just wanted to amplify a couple of things that Director Benner mentioned. This week's Government to Government Summit was, it was a very powerful program, actually. And there were two pieces that caught my attention in particular. One was a leaders roundtable that many of us in the room had a chance to observe and learn from. That was very powerful. And the challenges, I have to say, continue to today. This is not a historic conversation. This is a today conversation. And then there was actually a bit of a tabletop exercise that everyone got a chance to participate in that was called a design sprint. And it was a little bit of a role play where we were handed personalities of leadership within the tribes and within state agencies. And we had a chance to practice and talk about the challenges to consultation, to collaboration, to coordination, and to communication, and just talk through what some of those barriers are, how to identify them, and how to move around or past them in times that are designed to divide us. So it was a time well spent. It was well done. And thanks to Chair Mead for hosting us at the Coquel with the Coquel tribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bateman.
Oh,
Appreciate
could I follow
Yeah,
in Director
absolutely.
Benner's lead and note 2 grants that are closing imminently. So I just wanted to throw those out there very quickly. We have our planning technical assistance grants and our community green infrastructure grants that close, I believe, today and Monday. Those 2, they're both available on our website. But if you were thinking along those lines, particularly our local partners at cities and counties, please jump in and take a look at those today. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bateman, and look forward to hearing what types of grants were approved when that process is concluded. That sounds great. Is some of the land use planning grant program directed at the Every Mile Counts program adoption, or is it kind of a broader?
It is broader, more broad than that. Yes.
All right, thank you. Great. Any other questions on the government to government conversation or comments about future involvement with tribes? Okay, then I will go ahead and my next update, I wanted to go ahead and mention a meeting that Jeff Crook and I were invited to, which was a meeting of the Oregon Sustainability Board. And that meeting happened late last month. The chair of the Sustainability Board, Rex Burkholder, wasn't able to join us today, but I wanted to welcome Josh Proudfoot, who is a board member and in his day job works for Parametrics as their Director of Climate and Sustainability Management. And I also wanted to welcome lead staff for the Sustainability Board, Zechariah Heck, who is also with us today. Josh, would you please just remind our commissioners about the mission of the Sustainability Board? And then we can follow up after that.
Absolutely, and thank you for having us. Just the first message is that the Sustainability Board comes in peace, and we would love to support and align where we can with the Commission and avoid duplicate efforts. But our charge is to oversee and support state agencies in delivering sustainability in their operations and in their service function. So obviously some overlap because climate change matters in sustainability world. Really, we have one extra role that we can play, which is policy recommendations. But mostly I'm here to say we'd like to align and support, and that's the primary gist. And thank you for having us here, and we will hopefully be working in the background to add oomph to where you need it, and maybe to clear the path in a few places or focus on different things given your focus. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Thanks for joining us. We posted a memo that the board drafted as part of the agenda item that Jeff and I participated in, and in that that memo, there were a number of issues that were identified and different ways that the Sustainability Board might consider relative to collaboration with the Commission. And we had a really good discussion on both of those topics and have identified some next steps, possible next steps. And one of the topics that really came up as an important topic was how the state, kind of the role of state government in advancing markets to support the transition to clean energy, and in particular, how agencies could combine efforts in clean energy procurement approaches to help in that effort, and also to find cost savings for state agencies, which is always important and will be especially important in the near term. So there are a number of topics that we could dig into together. I'd like to convene a committee of the commission to have a few more conversations with a few folks from the Sustainability Board to identify at least one topic that we could advance collectively over the next year and put on our joint agenda or on our agenda with participation from the Sustainability Board. So if you're willing to engage in this effort, please let me know in the next week or so. I anticipate that this would require a few meetings and some prep time over the next 6 months, and that the product would be a plan for joint discussions that we would host. So, which could include kind of an agenda item, potential honing in on the topic, and identification of speakers as well as possible legislative recommendations. So if you're willing to step in and participate in that, please do let me know, and CC Jeff on that. And it would be great to hear back by the end of next week if you're interested. So thank you. Any other updates that commissioners would like to provide?
Catherine, I just wanted to sort of raise my hand, and I happen to know Josh and have met some of the other Sustainability Commission folks during Sustainable Building Week this week in Portland, and would be happy to help with that effort of looking for areas of overlap and mutual interest.
Thank you, Commissioner. And do you want to talk a little bit about that meeting that you were at, the Sustainable Buildings meeting?
Oh, sure. I mean, Sustainable Building Week is a series of events over the course of the week that we're in today, where folks get together on various topics related to sustainable buildings and sustainable, planning work. And I've participated in a couple of those events. We hosted an event on our climate justice plan in my role as sustainability director for Multnomah County. I also participated yesterday in an event with the City of Possibilities, talking about planning for resilience with some architects and planners from private industry. So lots of great events. I think there's a party tonight if folks are in the Portland metro area.
Great, thank you for that, and appreciate your interest in participating in that. Any other updates?
McDonald, this is Commissioner Apter. I just wanted to make sure the rest of the commission was aware that there were a number of informational hearings during September legislative days focused on federal rollbacks on climate and clean energy and implications for Oregon, including really excellent panels by a number of commissioners and agency directors. So if folks were not able to listen into those presentations live, I would just really encourage folks to listen to the recordings posted on OLIS. I'm happy to drop in links, but was really happy to see that as a focus of legislative days in September, and hopefully a continued focus heading into next session. And I know will also be part of our ongoing work here. So I'll make sure to drop those links in, but really appreciate the commissioners who participated and provided really thoughtful presentations.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. Yeah, if you could drop the links in, and then maybe Jeff could also follow up. We'll send some notes out as follow up to this meeting. We can put them in that as well. Thank you. Any other updates?
Chair, this is Kristen from PGE. My camera doesn't seem to, it's going on and off today and I can't seem to find it, but But I did want to just share for people's just sort of background knowledge. You may have read about it in the newspaper, but we got news last week of more federal cuts in grants for clean energy projects in Oregon. 3 of the grants for which Portland General Electric was primary were summarily canceled on Thursday night. These are projects that were already under contract. Work was already done. People were hired. Work was underway. There is a 4th project, much larger and even more significant, I would argue, for the state's clean energy future, that is $250 million, where the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs are the primary, partnering with PG on a transmission line from Central Oregon out to the Willamette Valley. That project has not officially been cut or curtailed, although it was included on the initial list of clean energy grants that were being targeted by the Office of Management and Budget for cutting. So fingers crossed that perhaps maybe other minds have reconsidered that project, but not a great sign of things to come.
Thank you for that unfortunate, disappointing update. Is that kind of amazing for that to happen to projects that are under contract and where work is being done? Is there any response to try and overturn that?
I think we're having conversations, both the state and utilities are having conversations with other utilities and states and entities where these grants were cut. This is obviously part of a larger political dynamic that goes well beyond sort of, the state of Oregon and its plans. So I don't think we're particularly hopeful on the ones that have already been cut, but we're certainly looking into every possibility there.
Director Brenner, I read, I think that there's a 30-day appeal window for those cancellations. Is that something is that accurate, and is the state planning to avail itself of that window?
So none of the projects that were cut in this most recent round that Commissioner Sheeran mentioned went directly to the state. So that would be a question for the entities who held the contracts. I did raise my hand to thank Kristen for bringing that up and mention that one of the major projects cut in the Northwest was the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. So that was $1 billion to launch a hydrogen economy in the Northwest. None of that funding went specifically to the state, but we invested a lot of time, a lot of my time into that effort. And, the hub is definitely looking at what our options are in terms of pushing back. The state did lose, I might have mentioned this at the last meeting, I can't remember the timing, $86.6 million for our Solar for All program, which like the projects Kristen mentioned, was already in process. And we did push back. We had, I think, 30 days to appeal that decision to the EPA, which we did. And now we're waiting for them to see the light and change their mind and reinstate that funding.
Great, thanks for that action. Commissioner Sheeran, did you want to add another comment?
Yeah, no, sorry, that's still my hand up. But there, just to confirm, my understanding is there is a 30-day appeal window.
Great.
Commissioner Sheeran, I would just, I would hope that maybe our commission, or you'd think of our commission as hopefully supportive of any appeals process, and if there's a benefit. And I'm new to the commission, so I don't know whether or not they're what our exact rules are, but sometimes a statement from a commission calling out some of the what I would characterize as lawless action to cancel lawfully executed contracts as a counterproductive to say the least. So I would just maybe, I know I'm new, I don't want to stir the pot, I'm not a voting member, but just thinking if there's ways that this commission can be helpful to your efforts to preserve the funding that you work so hard to get.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Do let us know if there's anything we can do. Great. Any other updates from commissioners? Okay, well, with that, we'll transition to our next topic on natural climate solutions, our natural climate solutions work stream. And we can go ahead and transition the slide. Not that there's a lot on it, but I wanted to mention that in addition to identifying some commissioners to work on collaboration with the Sustainability Board, I want to establish a committee to really be able to focus and dig in deeper on one of our key deliverables for next year, which is the development of a recommendation on a sequestration and storage goal for natural and working lands in Oregon. And as you all may recall or have seen, in 2021, the commission adopted a natural and working lands proposal and natural climate solutions proposal for the governor. And it included a draft goal for increased sequestration on natural and working lands in Oregon. And following that discussion and the development of that draft goal, we concluded that it would be really important to do some additional work to refine that goal and to make sure we understand how we're going to track progress towards the goal. And two projects that staff are working on will inform the decision that the commission will make in the next spring. And that is the development of the first inventory for natural and working lands, or what appears in the EPA documents as the land use change and forestry inventory. So staff are currently working with a consultant on that, and that will be an important piece of the puzzle. In addition, in January, we will be hearing from a new consultant who will be working on the development of activity and community impact metrics, which will also be really important in terms of thinking about how we track our progress towards increased sequestration on Oregon's natural and working lands. And so the committee that I am forming will really go a little deeper and then help provide recommendations to staff on preliminary projects, as well as helping to guide some of the development of recommendations for the full commission. We on committees, we do have a quorum rule, so we can't have more than 6 members of any committee that we establish without making it a public meeting. And so we're looking for up to 6 people to participate on this committee. And I've done some preliminary outreach, and we have a couple of volunteers, but also just interested in others that might be willing to serve on this committee. We do hope to kick this committee off as soon as possible. And in fact, on November 3rd or sometime that week, we're hoping to have the first meeting of the committee. That commitment of time is estimated to be between 10 and 20 hours over the next 6 months to kind of track and understand the development of the 2 products that I mentioned, and to work with staff on the development of the recommendation that we will hear next spring. So that is a second request. Ideally, if you can get back to me by noon on Monday and just let me know if you're willing to participate in that, I would appreciate it if you haven't already. So thank you. And I'll take any questions about the task that's in front of us, and also any comments. Commissioner Thorndike?
Yeah, just not necessarily for a membership portion, but is there part of this also reaching out to land trust community? I know in California, I know Pacific Forest Trust and some of that was working directly with the climate goals and on those issues. And just wearing my hat down here for Southern Oregon, Land Conservancy. I mean, that it's, that's a potential benefit to all the parties to be able to try to quantify, what happens with the conservation easement or acquisition. But I didn't know if that was part of, or at least reaching out to that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for raising that. I should have mentioned it. As you all may recall, we, as directed in House Bill 3409, we established an advisory committee for natural and working lands. And that committee, it has been engaged in the inventory project and will be engaged in the activity and community-based metrics discussion. So there's some outreach that's happening through that. And then in addition, the consultants that we've hired have been doing outreach to gather information that will inform those discussions. So there's definitely an outreach plan and the as well as for the work that we're doing on the workforce development and training product that we're working on as well. So yeah, thanks for raising that. And that is important, that outreach to gather all the data that we can gather to inform those things and to get feedback on the metrics that we'll be using to track our progress. Any other comments or questions about this committee?
Yeah, Chair McDonald, hi. This is Sarah Rife, ODFW Habitat Division Administrator and Director Colbert's
Sarah.
delegate to the commission. Good morning. My question was somewhat similar in trying to understand the difference between this committee and the Natural Working Lands Advisory Committee. And maybe one thing that would be helpful, you mentioned the committee will go deeper and provide recommendations to staff on preliminary projects. Can you provide an example of what you mean by projects?
Apologies if I misspoke. I meant products. So, draft inventories, draft metric list, those things rather than specific projects. Does that make sense?
Okay, so in terms of products, like inventory of the types of lands that should be included in what Oregon considers to be its natural and working lands inventory.
On the methodology for developing an inventory.
Okay.
So it's less about, what priority habitats or systems, but more about how the state will, the methodology the state will use to provide that inventory. And then similarly on the activities and community-based metrics, it would be input on what those activities. So there might be a little more intersection of that second deliverable or two deliverables on kind of project-based priorities.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And I also should just note that one of the areas that we've been focusing on quite a bit over the last year is the projects that the fund agencies are doing to advance the natural climate solutions that were funded in the 2023 legislative session. And the scope of the inventory and the activity and community-based metrics is really bigger than that. It's not just what happens through those funds, but ideally, what overall is happening in Oregon to increase net sequestration and storage in Oregon's natural and working lands. Any other questions or comments on this effort? Great. Thank you. So with that, I will turn things over to Alan, who will introduce our consultants, Chris and Yule, and just great to see the two of you again, Chris and Yul, but I'll turn things over to Alan to kick off our next topic and to introduce our consultants.
Thank you, Chair McDonald. Again, my name is Alan Zelenka. I'm the Assistant Director at the Oregon Department of Energy for the Planning and Innovation Division, of which the Climate Action Team that's working on the TIGGR project is part of that. So we're going to be talking about the TIGGR project, Transformational Integrated Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction Project. Comes with its own built-in mascot. And we're going to talk about the emissions reductions forecast that we've been doing. Next slide, please. So the TIGGR project, which was done in 2021 through 2023, had really three main components. We were supposed to come up with a forecast of greenhouse gas emissions, what we call the business as usual line, and then assess the impacts of existing programs and regulations on that business as usual. So reducing the amount from each of the programs through 2035. We weren't looking at 2050. We thought 2035 would be daunting enough. So that TIGGR project was looking at 2035 only. And then if there was a gap, we would assess additional opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So in that project, TIGGR 1.0, it was a multi-year process, as I mentioned. It came from a U.S. Climate Alliance grant, and we had about 1.5 people working on this, plus our modeling consultant, SSG, which carried over into TIGGR 2.0. And the commission was the review and public engagement committee for the project. We engaged over 95 people in 3 meetings, 3 public meetings, 100 public comments, and we engaged 9 state agencies. And we focused on the project with 15 commission subcommittee meetings on this particular project. In contrast, the Oregon State Energy Strategy had over 14 FTE working on it, including a dedicated project manager and project lead, well over $1 million, 2 consultants, modeling and engagement, and then well over 120 meetings to do all of that work. Next slide, please. So what we found in the TIGGR, initial TIGGR project 1.0, when we did that analysis, included the 15 state policies and programs that we had already adopted, plus the CAFE standards at the federal level, that would have set us up to have the policy infrastructure to meet our goal by 2035, if fully implemented and fully funded. Those are big caveats. And further noting that the 2 what I call big lever programs, HB 2021, the 100% clean energy program for electricity for IOUs, and the Climate Protection Program, or CPP, those 2 programs and all their associated programs represented about 97% of the way towards getting to our goal in 2035. So all those programs and regulations that contributed to reducing fossil fuels that are covered under the CPP, such as Advanced Clean Cars, Advanced Clean Trucks, Clean Fuels Program, all of those lower the amount the CPP needs to reduce. And so they fit under that umbrella of CPP, as did the federal CAFE standards. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit more detailed view of might have to hit it a couple of times, Jen. One more. There we go. Go back. This is the list of the 15 programs plus the federal CAFE standards that were listed. I will note that this list is 16 plus the 2 non-quantifiable programs over mile counts and CFEC. In TIGGR 2.0, this number dramatically increased, and we'll show you that in some upcoming slides that Chris is going to talk about. So with that, next slide, please. With that knowledge that we had the policy infrastructure in place to meet our 2035 goals, we decided to explore whether or not we could and what it would take to meet our 2035 goal, not in 2035, but in 5 years earlier in 2030, and accelerating it. So we had to come up with programs that were above and beyond what would have normally occurred in all those other actions in that big blue area. So that's why there's a lot of little wedges here, 35 different programs that ended up being what we thought would be above and beyond actions already taken to meet our 2035 goal. And we found two things. One, that yes, we could do it. And two, it was cost effective to do it. It created a lot of co-benefits along with it as well, including tremendous health benefits. The results from this were helpful in informing our roadmap to 2030 that we sent to the legislature. So that's where we ended up with TIGR 1.0. Next slide, please, Jen. So TIGR 2.0 is an update of that. And we, in part of HB 3409, there's a section in there that says that we need to periodically prepare a detailed forecast of greenhouse gas emission reductions and greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what TIGR 2.0 is trying to comply with. So we're doing that in two phases. Jeff's going to talk about this more in detail towards the end, but in phase one, we're updating the greenhouse gas emissions assumptions and that forecast. That's what we're going to talk about today, which included all the new inputs that weren't available or weren't around during our 2022 when we were doing the modeling. So data centers wasn't a thing back then, now it is. And then we also wanted to look at what's the impact of some of the federal changes on our programs, in particular the CAFE standard is the big one, impacts of new state programs and their SSR project. So that's where we are today. We're presenting the preliminary draft results for public comment in phase one. Phase two, we'll take that and look at any gaps that we need to make our goals in both 2035 and 2050 and come up with a menu of programs that could help us meet those reductions and meet those goals. Before I turn it over to Chris Strashak of SSG and Yule, they were the consultant on both TIGR 1.0 and TIGR 2.0. They've been working in this space for well over 20 years. It's one of the premier modeling firms on greenhouse gas emission reductions. And they've been working in this country and their home country in Canada, all over the place. And I think you guys are up 10 or 20 entities on comprehensive climate action plans and other plans that you've been doing around the North America. Chris is going to talk about how the model works. Tori Leahy from our ODO climate action team, she'll talk about the assumptions that went in and the programs. She'll talk about the programs that went into that are new to TIGR 2.0. Chris will talk about the assumptions and also do our draft results. Jeff will finish up by talking about next steps in our public comment period on phase one. One word about, before we get into it too much with SSG, that the model that they used for TIGR 2.0 was very different than the model we used for the energy strategy that SETI and Evolve put together. That model was a supply side least cost planning model that built up a portfolio of least cost resources to meet the demand that we were seeing in the model and also to meet our greenhouse gas emission goals. The SSG model takes a really different tack to it. It starts by creating a business as usual forecast, assuming that we had no climate programs. What would our emissions be? And that's what we call business as usual. Then we started adding in those programs and seeing what those reductions would be from all the state programs and see if we meet our 2035 and 2050 goals. So the two models are similar but different. And I wanted to make sure people understood that you can't, they're not apples and lizards, but they're kind of apples and oranges when you try to compare the two. So I will say that we did make sure that all of the assumptions in TIGR 2.0 were consistent with the modeling that we just finished off and are finalizing in the energy strategy. So the two things are basically using the same assumptions to do the modeling. The assumptions in the energy strategy went above and beyond what was just going to be done within the programs, and that's the confines of TIGR 2.0, just what would occur within the confines of the programs that we have and regulations that we have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris And he will talk about how the model works and some of our results.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you again, commissioners, for having me talk with you all. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. So appreciate the time as always. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So I know some of this might be old or have heard this before, but Alan asked me to kind of just go through the model, philosophy, the structure and how we do things at SSG, just to give kind of a refresher or get new commissioners up to speed. So as Alan said, our model is a little bit different than the one that was used for the OSIS modeling or the state energy strategy. So it's not an optimization model, it's a systems dynamics model that allows us to kind of do different things or look at systems in a different way. So some of the features of our model is that it's a bottom-up model. So what that means is that it tracks the stocks of energy using equipment and activities within the state, and how these stocks are used and are therefore how GHG emissions come from the use of energy in different ways. So, and these stocks evolve and change over time. So as you put in kind of new shares or new technologies into the system, the model will take those technologies and introduce them into the system in a way that's grounded in the physical reality of how things work. So once you buy something, you don't just get a new one next year necessarily. You buy a furnace and that furnace lasts for 10 years, and then you go and look for some other furnace after that one or another heating system after that breaks down. So the model is consistent in that way. And this level of detail allows us to evaluate the impacts of programs at the sectoral and the geospatial level. So it's also transformational. So we can evaluate departures from historical patterns. So if you rely on historical trends, then you're generally going to go in the same direction. And we want to be able to look at transformational change. How can we do things differently than we have done in the past? Because we know we need to make bigger changes to tackle this problem we're facing. Transparency. So the modeling logic and assumptions are extensively documented in the model and are accessible and to be understood by those who want to. So we try to make this as open as possible. We don't want any black boxes kicking around so that nobody knows what's going on. We can also look at, as well as the GHG emissions, we also can layer on economic impacts on top of these. So what is the capital cost of this transition? What could be the possible energy costs or savings associated with transitioning, to these different fuels or different technologies? We can also layer public health impacts onto this. So since we are modeling emissions and we are tracking criteria air pollutants of the burning of fossil fuels, we could look at the benefits of those reduced air pollutions in combination with the EPA's COBRA model. We can also look at things of like health benefits of cycling or walking more or things like that associated to changing the way that we move around. And then equity impacts is also a lens that we can apply to some of our analysis as well. So modeling reports can be used to evaluate the impacts of programs on archetypical households, illustrating how measures may have different effects on various populations. So our model is spatial too, which I'll touch on in a little bit. Next slide, please. This slide's not necessarily meant to be read or understood, but the point is that the model structure is integrated. So we're not looking at one sector that's separate from another sector that's separate from another sector. The energy system is integrated in ways that are meaningful, and we want to try and capture those meaningful integrations so that if we make a change to one sector or one area, that we are ensuring that the other sectors follow suit. So for example, if you're putting in local energy, it's not just one sector necessarily or one area that's getting it. We can say that this local energy is going to all the households or all the commercial buildings in that area. Or if you make a change to the land use, that's going to impact not only the buildings that are in there, but maybe the transportation patterns as well, which is also meaningful to understand. Next slide, please. So the reason that we find that this approach is useful is that we want to try and be able to represent nonlinear behavior. because the world doesn't just work with straight lines and trends. We make decisions based on incomplete information, and we want to be able to understand kind of necessarily what happens with that behavior. It's essentially nonlinear. We also want to represent diversity and heterogeneity. Sorry, that word always gets me. Again, if you're looking at the state itself, there's a lot of different areas, different population centers and urban areas, there's rural areas. We need to understand how that diversity and that behavior influences the energy and the decisions that the state needs to make around policy. And then we want to incorporate uncertainties or contingencies. So what are the unknowns, and how can we best represent those and kind of plan for those in the future? So those are some of the lenses that we use when we're developing, when we're using our approach.
Can I just interject one question? Are you comfortable with taking questions as we go, or would
Sure.
you like to hold them till? Okay, great.
Oh, it's up to you, I guess, Chair McDonald. How fast do you want this presentation to go, I guess?
I think I think given some of the what I know is pretty dense information that's coming on upcoming slides, I think taking questions during the talk would be helpful, as long as you're comfortable with that. So thank you.
That works for me, if that works for
And
you.
then follow up afterwards too.
Yep. And I can pause too, and after I get through kind of a set of slides, and we can move on from there. Next slide, please. So our lives also live in the idea of scenarios. So scenarios are generally a collection of actions or policies or changes that we want to see in the system that we're modeling. And really, these are stories about the future. So we want to, based on the assumptions or the idea or the story that we make, we want to see what could possibly happen in the future based on those things. So we're not saying this is a prediction of what's going to happen. Obviously, a lot of work still needs to go behind all the assumptions that we make. But it does give us a good sense of what the possibility of that future could look like. And so usually we display, one of the tools we use to display this story is on what's called a wedge diagram. And this is an example of one. You'll see one coming up that's specific to the project that we're working on. But the wedge diagram kind of tells us kind of where we are right now on the very left. That's the current emission level. Then you have some sort of reference scenario, as Alan mentioned, you have a business as usual. And that kind of gives you a sense of, if you don't really do too much, what's going to happen in that world that you're modeling. And then you have wedges or emissions reductions from each of the actions or each of the policies that you wanted to explore, so you can understand how they impact the system and what their kind of impact looks like. And as you stack those all up, you get to kind of your target or your goal and you can see or help to understand how you get from point A to point B and what are the magnitude of those changes required. And then at the bottom there you have your remaining emissions or your carbon liability, which is the emissions left over and the work that maybe you still need to do if you haven't reached your target yet.
I'll just point out, this is not Oregon, this is an example, but we will show you a similar one for Oregon.
I have a question. You've got a category of land use. And we are simultaneously working on a natural and working lands inventory. So can you just explain, and again, maybe this isn't appropriate because this is not Oregon, but when you do talk about Oregon, just kind of touch on how land use might be considered. Is it primarily how that influences transportation emissions, or is it broader than that?
Yeah, it's in the Tigger province, it's limited more to that and looking at agricultural use, but not necessarily the natural and working lands. That's where we know that you're working on kind of generating that, so we don't want to kind of overlap what you're doing and maybe do something different that would lead to confusion and more questions. So
this would be
that could be layered on after, for sure.
So this work you're doing is really focused on the sector-based emissions.
Yeah.
Right. And I know you know this, Chair McDonald, but for other folks, it's helpful to think of the different buckets of different kinds of inventories. There's a sector-based inventory, which is use of energy, creates greenhouse gas emissions. Then There's another inventory we do on consumption-based, which goes upstream from things that occur in the state. So it's bigger, but overlaps in the Venn diagram. And then there's the sequestration or natural climate solutions inventory, natural working lands inventory that we're working on, which is mostly around sequestration. But part of that goes into the mitigation to reduce. So helpful to always try to keep those three different circles in mind that sort of overlap, but not very much. And then more directly to your land use in Tigger, it's if we have more dense population, they travel less miles and they use transit more. So those kind of things are the effect of policies like CFAC. Climate and friendly equitable communities that DLCD and ODOT are doing. And so that has an impact on energy use in the sector inventory and therefore reduces greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Alan.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Again, in systems dynamics speak, we're always thinking of things in stocks and flows. So stocks are the collection of things. So in this example, it's the collection of vehicles that you have in the state. And then flows are the change of, or the flows of material or energy or different things. And in this case, it's the flow of new material, new vehicles into that stock. And so as, if you're gonna click forward, and as you change that flow over time, you can see the stock on the very right is changing as you're getting more electric vehicles introduced into the system. You know, the older vehicles are retiring. Based on the kind of makeup of that new flow, you're going to get more electric vehicles in the overall stock going forward. And this is important because strategic planning requires a target pathway, not just a target endpoint. So as you saw in the graph, there's a pathway that's involved in there, and pathways should be physically coherent. So what that means, as I was talking about earlier, you know, you can't just make a change from, you know, like 100% internal combustion engines in 1 year and then 100% electric vehicles in the next year. There's a transition period that's based on the stock and how those stocks change over time. So some stocks can be bigger and can be slower. Some stocks can be kind of smaller and can be quicker. And so those dynamics are important in understanding how much time and when you need to act in order to make this transition happen. So, you know, you can't just wait necessarily 40 years and then do everything at the last year. You know, there's a period of time that takes for that transition to happen, and that's important to understand and consider when especially when you're making policies, as most of you know. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I do have a question.
Sure.
Can we go back to the previous slide, please? I'm going to have a meta question at the end, Chair McDonald, maybe more about process. I'm just going to say, you know, given everything that's been happening, especially in the last year, you know, it's very hard to communicate these complex things, and I'm sure you didn't intend it this way, but I'm not sure that framing this as magic is the best way to say this. I think we should be honestly trying to make a fair, objective, fact-based, science-based way to try to do our best to communicate to as wide an audience as we can. What we're seeing in the public discussions is that there's a lot of skepticism of things. And so I know these things are complex, and so I'm going to have a question maybe at the end about sort of the process and the meta. I'm sure your intentions were good here, and I'm sure there's good math and science behind this. But I just think, you know, something like this is very easily grabbed as a screenshot, you know, and could be misinterpreted.
Thank you, Commissioner Lim. I think that's a really good point. I kind of had the same thought when I first saw the deck. And, you know, I know from the engagement I had in the past on Tigger 1.0 that there is a lot of detail and transparency, as Chris mentioned. That's an important part of the way that SSG does their modeling. So I think we'll see a lot of transparency, and imagine that this was just a a bit of a cheeky shorthand for the purposes of the slide, but we maybe should modify it before, before our future discussions.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Commissioner. And I think this slide is probably made a little bit before the events that we're currently seeing happen, where things maybe weren't as dire. So we can definitely update that. Okay, moving on. So the last point I want to make about the modeling is also spatially disaggregated. So not only are we building it from the ground up from all of the stocks and the activity that's happening within the state of Oregon, but we're also understanding where that happens spatially. So this is the zoning system that we're using. So the main zone is is the counties, and then breaking out even some of those counties further into kind of larger urban areas to understand kind of what the differences are between those. Because obviously, the energy consumption that you use within an urban area is much different than the energy consumption and even the energy makeup that you use in rural areas. So being able to understand those differences and those dynamics, and maybe create actions or policies that might be different for those different places, and see how that interaction plays out over time can be useful. So this is the zone system that we're using. You can see, most of the major areas in the Northwest are kind of captured, and I tried my best to capture it as much as possible. I'm sure I left out a city somewhere that somebody thinks that should be in here, and I apologize if I did, but we tried to limit it in some way. And so this is the system that we came up with. And so all of the results within the model are actually by these different zones, and then we can aggregate up into counties or states, or dive down into each of these zones if we'd like to kind of explore what the implications of the decisions that we're putting into the model are. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the two scenarios that we're going to be exploring today, as Alan mentioned earlier, is the business as usual, or the BAU, as you'll see it in the slides going forward. This scenario involves no future policy or interventions, and I'll go through what the assumptions are in a little bit. And then there's the BAP, or the business as planned, and this scenario represents the impact of current policies. And again, we'll be going through the long list of policies and all the work that's been done by the group and the different agencies to kind of collect all the work that's been going on, so we can try and capture that as best as possible in the next couple of slides. So if you want to go forward one more, thank you. So the criteria, just go back one, sorry. Thanks. So in order for kind of a policy or an action or an intervention to be considered in the BAP, there are some criteria that the management group came up with, or the project management group came up with. So it has to be at least one of these 6 things. So there needs to either be some funding involved around it. There needs to be maybe a regulation or clear enforceable mechanisms adopted by the state. So there's some high certainty that this policy or this action will happen. And as Alan mentioned too, there needs to be, where appropriate, be consistent with the energy strategy. So in most of the cases we are, but in some cases we're not quite as aggressive as Alan mentioned, because the state energy strategy's goal was a little different in how to get kind of to a different target. And for the business as planned, we're looking at what's actually been happening, or what are the implications of the current policies that are on the books. So these are, when you look at the lists coming up, this is the criteria. So if you notice that something's not on there, it probably didn't meet any of these criteria, or so we're not including it as part of the BAP, but we could include it as the further analysis as the phase 2, which Alan will talk about at the end. Next slide, please. So the assumptions that went into the business as usual. So there's, again, it's fairly simple. So we're not really looking at any major changes. We want to see, if starting from now, what happens if not much change happens going forward, like not much intervention, I guess, happens going into the future. So we're really looking at a population projection. So population increase. So we're using the PSU population forecast by county. So as the population increases, in some cases actually decreasing in some places, how is that going to affect or impact energy consumption and therefore emissions? Employment projections are used to project forward increases or changes in non-residential buildings. So keeping the same mix of non-residential buildings that we have in each of those zones. And as you get more employment, you're building up more retail space, for example, or more commercial buildings in order to be able to house that new employment. And that comes from the State of Oregon Employment Department. Heating and cooling degree days projections from the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. So, projecting that forward and looking at, the number of heating and cooling degree days impacts, how much energy you're using for your space conditioning and what that impacts of that are in the future. And then data centers, which is a big one for this one, as Alan mentioned. So, data center, there's already, quite a bit of data centers in Oregon right now, and looking at the Northwest Power Council's load growth forecast. In the model, we're projecting to have 2.54 gigawatts by 2030, and then 3.42 gigawatts by 2046. And then we're using a 1.5% growth rate after that out to 2050. And I guess another assumption that I should have put on the slide, and apologies, is that the assumption is that for any new growth, 50% of that growth will be in IOU territory, and the other 50% will be in COU territory going forward. So as we'll get to in a moment, that has some implications actually into the emissions reductions that can be achieved with the BAP policies.
And those assumptions were consistent with what we did in the energy strategy model.
And Chris, just I assume that there were no big changes in the top three considerations or assumptions. It's really the big change is the fourth assumption about data centers. Is that correct? Or were there other differences that?
No, that was from the TIGR 1.0. That was really the main one. Yeah. Because those weren't really a thing yet when we started working on that. So that's a relatively new challenge that we were working with.
Thank you.
All right, and I believe the next slide I'm passing it over to Tori.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So as Alan mentioned, there were 15 programs and regulations that were included in TIGR 1.0, and since TIGR 1.0, we have 45 programs and regulations that will be included in the analysis and modeling for TIGR 2.0. And Jen, you can go ahead and switch through the slides. Thank you. And so with those 45 programs, that's 3 times as many, which is pretty incredible. And I think it highlights the state's commitment to addressing these emissions, but also the capabilities of agencies to track emissions, because the programs and regulations that are highlighted are all either new since TIGR 1.0 or now have available data, because the requirement for the data is it has to be verifiable and quantifiable. And so this is also not exhaustive. There are other programs that are ongoing in the state, but they did not meet that requirement and criteria to have the verifiable and quantifiable data yet. So in the next iteration, hopefully there will be even more.
Sorry, just to skip a beat for a second, that's a lot to celebrate.
Absolutely.
Program. So thank you.
Yes. Yes. And then that last being the federal programs of CAFE standard as well, which has since been canceled, but we are still continuing this important work in the state, as you all know. And in addition to all these programs, we held 32 meetings with all of the agency staffs who oversee these programs. So this process was extremely comprehensive and thoroughly vetted with all these subject matter experts. And so we're also proud of that, because we really appreciated that engagement and their expertise to help ensure this modeling was as accurate and represented what is ongoing in the state currently. And then I will pass off to Chris momentarily, but just so you all understand, these 45 programs all went into the modeling and analysis, but they're broken into where we'll have results for 19 categorized groupings of actions, which again, Chris will dive into with those results. So when you see those results, you also will not see the 45 visualizations or results, but they go into the modeling analysis and give us the entire picture of what GHG emission reductions will be in the state forecasted through to 2050. So I will now hand this back to Chris.
One more point about that. To do all of this work and to figure out what all of these different programs contribute to our greenhouse gas emission reductions took a lot of effort. Tori did in particular a great job on wrangling all the different agencies in the state. And I think we did over 30 meetings with different agencies to figure out exactly what was going on in the state and helping putting it into the model.
Thanks, Tori and Alan. Yeah, if you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading through all of these. I know these are going to be shared out to you all, so you can dive into them a little bit more. But the next couple of slides are really meant to show how we bundle, like as Tori mentioned, we modeled all of them, but there was a lot of synergies or overlap or kind of, work, building on top of each other. And so instead of modeling each of these actions kind of independently, sometimes they could be bundled together and can be modeled as kind of one action. And so the next couple of slides here just reflect kind of some of these bundles. So, one bundle is looking at new energy efficient buildings. So there's a number of different policies and actions that were included in there. If you go to the next slide. There's retrofits of existing buildings. So, again, looking at, weatherization programs, putting in heat pumps, implementing healthy homes repair funds. So a lot of different things that are in there, and that we kind of, built them together and put it into kind of a retrofit of existing buildings program. You will notice that kind of, I guess, for consistency with the Tigger 1.0, the heat pumps or heat pump rebate program kind of part is broken out a little bit into one of the wedges, but and the building retrofits or the envelope part is kind of separate, but it's kind of all built into, again, kind of bundled together a little bit. Go to the next slide, please. Another grouping that we have that looks at transition to electric vehicles. So really looking at kind of, the vehicle stock and transitioning those for looking at advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks. There are two big examples in there. Next one, please. There's reducing industrial emissions, so having their own kind of category. There's the climate protection program. One of the changes from the last time we did this is the industry sector now has their own kind of, it's not rules, but their own ability to choose which direction they can take to meet the climate protection program goals. So we wanted to include that as its own. And then there's a number of kind of waste or embodied kind of consumption-based emissions that Odo has helped us determine, looking at kind of reducing emissions from in-state producers and different things like that. Moving on to the next one. So reducing waste emissions. So the Recycling Modernization Act is kind of one of the big ones in here. So reducing emissions from methane emissions from landfills, and a couple of other things looking at reducing waste or reducing kind of packaging and so reducing the amount that goes to the landfill itself. So again, lots of detail here that we can dive into. Next slide, please. So one of the big ones is implementing HB 2021 and related actions. So again, kind of an umbrella action of that, which includes a lot of different things where we're not really looking at the supply side and the makeup of that. That was kind of part of the state energy strategy. So we're really looking at more of the demand side and the impacts that those changes from the state energy strategy would have, and HB 2021 would have on the kind of the emissions factor of the electricity that's being used in this model. And then to the next slide, please, and then we'll get through all of the policies, and we'll get to actually looking at the results. So kind of finally, ones that aren't easily kind of grouped together. So looking at energy efficiency standards for appliances. There's the implement the climate friendly and equitable communities, so or CFEC. So we're kind of reducing VMTs, what are some of the actions that we are actions around reducing VMTs. And then finally, last but not least, implementing the full climate protection program. As Alan mentioned earlier, things like advanced clean cars and trucks and the clean fuels program all are kind of fall within that CPP umbrella. And so after those are all done, modeling the remainder to get to kind of that final target of what that goal for the climate protection program would look like.
Before you go on to the next slide, Chris, I just wanted to point out that we just went over a lot of information very, very quickly. If we spent a lot of time going over it, that would be the 5-hour meeting today that we're not having. So it'll be included in the slides. We'll also have an assumptions document that will lay this out in a Word document that will allow you to go through that. So this is a lot. That the state's doing, and to Kathy's point, it's amazing how much the state's actually doing, and that should be applauded. But it's also very complex, and we've spent months pulling all this data together, working with our sister agencies, and pulling all this together and creating a complex set of actions that can, and which is why we need a model to do this, because they all interact. And so I just wanted to also point out that the assumptions and all these actions, almost all of it was vetted very thoroughly during the energy strategy. And having this model be consistent with the energy strategy model was very important, because we wanted to utilize that vetting process that we did early on in the energy strategy modeling process. So we wanted to use those very well thought through, very well vetted with the public and with the agency's assumptions to then put into this model as well. So we didn't need to then go do that whole process, which took months and months and months with the energy strategy again, because we already had done it. We're just borrowing it and putting it into this model. So that consistency with the energy strategy is important because of that interaction with agencies and the public.
Thank you, Alan. And this may be a good time just to pause for a second to see if there are any questions on what just got presented.
Yeah, I have another question, and I know this is overall. Yeah, overall, I think this is a good news story. So I don't want to give the wrong impression. And I know this is extremely complex. In some ways, that's my general point today, is that it is so complex that, as you said, Alan, it's so hard to squeeze such complex things into a short period of time. I would just say, again, something jumps out at me at this slide. I was involved in the energy process, as some of you might recall. And I did raise this question, like when an agency says reduce VMT, to a transportation person, that sort of like can mean different things. So if I could just parse it, like there may be reasons why VMT is actually going down in the state of Oregon, regardless of policy, okay? But one of the questions that I did ask during the energy process that was on a committee was, are we saying reduce VMT per capita or reduce total VMT? Because once you start to talk about a phrase like reduce VMT, then what you start to get into is suggesting reducing economic activity. So the language that we use, even if it's shorthand language, can be interpreted different ways. So here, my suggestion again is just to like clarify, do we mean reducing VMT per capita? That was what the analysts in the energy process did say to me.
Yes.
That's a great point.
Yes,
Alan?
that is what we did. We consistent with what we did in the energy strategy. We used the same analysis and the same kind of vetting. One difference is that in this analysis, the criteria for the BAP everything needed to be enforceable, had to have an enforceability mechanism to it, was one of the big criteria, or they had to be able to be highly certain that they were going to occur. The VMT transportation rule of 20% reduction doesn't really have an enforceability mechanism. So we're relying on in this analysis not to just reduce 20%, but to reduce according to the densification of our state, especially in the urban areas, through the CFEC program and land use that makes VMT reductions possible. In this case, we did a 5.5% reduction in VMT through 2050 to meet what we thought what was modeled by ODOT. And then also there's a little bit of that's shifting to alternate modes that also reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
And Commissioner Lamb, I really do appreciate your emphasis on the importance of messaging and how information is interpreted, because it's really important. So thank you.
Yeah, and the complexity is a very important point, and it's very math driven and computer model driven, with a lot of assumptions. And the assumptions and models are only as good as the assumptions that are going into them. That's why I want to double down on talking about the vetting process that we did in the energy strategy, and then again through our agencies on all the inputs into these models, because it took a lot to get all of these assumptions in place that we feel have a lot of confidence. We have a lot of confidence in, both in the energy strategy and in Tigger 2.0. All right, we can go on to showing the big reveal and the preliminary results.
Yeah, we don't want to get too excited about the results yet.
But
All of our
everybody's
great
good.
There's a
Everybody's
great
been
News
waiting
story,
for
Chair.
Okay.
story.
So this is the results of all the work that we've been doing over the last couple of months. So for those of you who have been around for Tigger 1.0 and might have a really good memory, you'll notice things are a little bit different. So the business as usual actually goes up quite a bit more, which, you know, again, the big change is data centers, and you're adding a lot of data center utility load there. So that's a lot more electricity use. And then in the business as usual, remember, like HB 2021 is not a thing. So you still have the same electricity kind of makeup that you have currently right now. So, you know, Oregon still has fairly clean electricity, but there's still some fossil fuels in that system. And then the business as planned, which is the kind of lower, more burgundy line, you can see quite a bit of reduction. So yeah, lots of good things. You're on your pathway down to getting close to 2050 goal, which is 14. You're missing it by 14 million metric tons, and we can look at some slides later to show you kind of what's remaining there and what's left to look at. But I guess maybe the bigger story here is that previously, the business's plan actually did meet the 2035 goal, but now we're 5 million metric tons short. And if you want to go to the next slide, the main takeaways from that, or the key understandings of that are, oh, sorry, next slide, please. So Oregon, Oregon's no longer to reach its 2035 goal, creating a gap. The main drivers are really the increased data center load growth. So with half of that being in consumer-owned utility territory, and it's not subject to the clean requirements of HB 2021. So as you're adding more load and HB 2021 is coming online, but still half of that new load is in the COU territory. So HB 2021 is not applying. So because those data centers are using unspecified energy, so they're not necessarily, or they're not allowed to use, and correct me if I'm wrong about the language here, Alan, but they're really not allowed to use kind of the hydro or the lower emissions electricity. They're using unspecified electricity which is usually from out of state, and is usually currently is fossil fuel driven, and it doesn't have to be clean energy according to HB 2021 because it's not covered. So you're using the electricity portion of those data centers is not getting cleaner over time, or doesn't have to get cleaner over time based on HB 2021. And the other smaller change is the cancellation of the CAFE standards. So in 2027, we cut off kind of any further changes and we keep that flat. So there's no more further reductions in the CAFE standards going out into the future for those two things. So the bigger one being the data center load, but the other one being the CAFE standard is what, since the BAU line goes up higher, the BAP line also has more work to do, and because of where you're placing things spatially in the state, it's going to impact how Oregon can reach this 2035 target.
Yeah, 2 points.
Alan, if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, 2 points on that. One on the CAFE standards. So most of the CAFE standard increases in efficiency and therefore the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions would have yet to occur. So the fact that it's been canceled, we're capturing the gains that we've made so far, but we're not making the additional gains and we're not rolling them back. That's pretty significant. It's about 3 million metric tons, and the gap's 5 by 2035. So that's a big chunk of it. On the data center loads, So again, going back to the criteria about what gets included in this model is, does it have a regulation and a clear enforcement mechanism, and is it adopted by the state? The fact that HB 2021 only applies to PGE and Pacific Core PAC, and it doesn't apply to the consumer-owned utilities in the state, or it means that we don't have a regulation or enforcement mechanism. So we're assuming a conservative assumption of the emission factors of market purchases. Could they, could it be cleaner? Absolutely. Could they, a fun acronym that people have come as Beyonce, bring your own new clean energy. They could Beyonce this load, but we didn't have a good estimate of how much is that going to be? 10%, 50%, all of it. So to be conservative in the plan, we wanted to say that none of it's going to be Beyonce. And so that's how we moved forward with the modeling.
Thank you, Alan. Representative Gamba.
Thanks, and apologies. I don't know what's going on with my video. It won't turn on. So there's an assumption that HB 2021 will be followed as written. How much effort was put into tracking actual behavior by the two big IOUs? For example, I don't believe PAC's most recent IRP even attempted to meet the requirements of 2021. It was sent back, so it remains to be seen what happens next. But even PGE, in reality on the ground, I don't see them meeting those targets either. So what was the how did you calculate that in?
So the what we're trying to do here is not necessarily have a progress report on all of the different progress people are making towards it, but whether or not the policy infrastructure allows us to get there. So the policy on HB 21 is that they will have 100% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. They may have a bumpy road to get there, but we're modeling success in TIGR 2.0, and meaning that we are assuming that we're going to that policy is going to be fulfilled. Same with the CPP, same with the advanced clean cars, all of those policies, until they are overturned and the nails in the coffin are pounded in, we're assuming in this analysis that we're going to meet those. So we're modeling success. We do have the ability in this next phase that we'll show you coming up, Representative, to be able to do some analysis on sensitivities around what happens if we don't. But for right now, on the BAP analysis, we're assuming we're modeling success and assuming that we meet all of our on the books program and regulations goals.
I appreciate that. One quick comment, if I may. Yes. There is a danger in that, because the top line message that the average legislator who's not really paying attention will take away is that we're doing good. And that makes them continue to do what they do now, which is to make climate the 12th priority or below in every decision or trade-off that is made in the legislature. I think it's important that, to the degree possible, measurements of actual current action, reality, GHG being actually removed from the atmosphere, not put into the atmosphere, is important to translate to the decision makers, because they make poor decisions otherwise.
Yeah, and thank you for that very important piece of advice to the public and for the legislators. When we talk about the programs and regulations already adopted, there's an important second part of that sentence, which is that the programs and regulations adopted, if they are fully implemented as planned and fully funded. And that's the role of the legislature and the governor to make sure that that occurs and the agencies to then fulfill that and implement it. So that's a very important caveat. If that's not true, and we don't end up doing it as planned and funding it to get to the point where we can do as planned, then we don't meet the goals. So there's a little bit of danger in being too pessimistic and too skeptical about this in that it could harm also the impetus behind the PUC saying, yes, we're going to meet our HB 2021 goals, or DEQ saying, yes, we are going to make sure that everybody does comply with the CPP, and making sure that because if we don't, the energy strategy shows us, it's a lot more expensive not to do that, and it makes it much more difficult to meet our greenhouse gas emission goals.
Yeah, and thank you, Alan and Representative Gamba. I think it is really important. And in addition, when we developed the roadmap to 2030, we emphasized the importance of making sure, especially the two big programs, but all of the existing programs were fully implemented. And that as we learned about what was needed to achieve the goals in some of those policies, that we would make sure to try and advance new policies to address any barriers. So we did emphasize that. I think it's a good reminder for us in terms of what we think about, and would love to get your input, Representative Gamba, on our upcoming biennial report that'll be delivered next December, and how we can make sure we're finding that right balance, and maybe some specific language to make it clear to people what, where we are today and what attention needs to be paid to this. So I really appreciate you bringing up that point of being super clear. And Commissioner Sheeran?
Yeah, thank you, Chair McDonald. So I think I want to reiterate, I think, where Representative Gamba was going, in that there are very rich discussions and analysis of what the forecast to the 2030, 35, and 40, targets for those who are regulated under HB 2021 are, what the headwinds are that, utilities are experiencing, what the potential solutions to those might be. So I think really trying to tie that to that analysis and to those conversations that are already happening in the context of DEQ and OPUC and with the legislature, I think is going to be critically important. And I don't see any of that reflected in here. I would also encourage a conversation with the COUs and the broader utility community about how it is that data center loads are being served in the state and how many of those loads are subject to HB 2021. Most of them are, to the best of my understanding, certainly in our system, are not market purchases. We have data centers who are directly building solar facilities in the state, or directly contracting for hydro and solar facilities. And of course, our COUs already have a high percentage hydro. So I think we may be not capturing sort of all of the dynamics that are in play right now to get the most accurate view of where the state is, at least as far as the electric sector is concerned, on that progress, and would encourage those conversations.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Sheeran. I think that would be a really helpful agenda item for one of our future meetings, of really digging into better understanding some of the complexity there. I had two just kind of detail oriented. I guess I was interested to see that the split of half of the data center growth being in COU territory versus the IOU territory. My impression was that more of it was happening in the COU territory, but I assumed that 50-50 split was based on some experience to date. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's Oak Ridge National Laboratory has been working on this with us, and they're just giving us this information now, and using that information of where we've been and what they see as the planned ones and the ones that are under construction, and then extrapolating from that. there's two locuses of data centers, one around the Portland area and one around the Dalles area. And they tend to go where they already are. And so given the trends that we've seen and what we know about what's planned, we were comfortable with doing a 50-50 split.
Great.
Can
Thank
you
you,
on the
Paul.
next slide, Jen?
Can just be, or, well, I wanted to ask one more question on the last slide, but we can go back to it. Go ahead.
Oh.
Chair
I was just
McDonald, I don't know if
thinking-
you've seen my hand, but it's been up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry, I do not. It is
You got
challenging.
3 hands up, Chair.
Great. Commissioner Von
Director.
Hagen.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious about how natural systems have played into this analysis, both as a source of emissions and a source of sequestration. So what the predictions have been about emissions from forest fire, grassland fires as an emission source. And then also as a strategy, what we are assessing in terms of sequestration strategies, in terms of increasing stocking on forests, reducing fire risk, improving agricultural practices, all the natural climate strategies. How do they play into this analysis?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good
Commissioner
question. And we have a whole
Go ahead, Alan.
work program on the natural working lands. We're, as you know, Commissioner, we're doing the natural working lands inventory right now, and also the workforce analysis, both of which are going to be done by the end of this year. And then following on that is a metrics work that's going to look at, if we implement this program, or this program, how much sequestration benefit and how much mitigation benefit do we see? And again, going back to those the Venn diagram with the 3 different ones, the degree, this is a sector-based analysis, and it's looking at, so sequestration doesn't impact this, but the degree that the natural working lands have a mitigation impact, it shows up. Those, we don't have any programs or regulations that we've adopted to actually do that here. So this is the analysis of all the different programs that we have, that we've kind of bundled together, those 45 into these categories. And you can see that it takes a lot. There's many arrows in the quiver to combat climate change and get towards our goal. But to Commissioner Sheeran and Representative Gamba's point, it's a very fragile system. If you don't implement it the way it's supposed to be implemented, and you don't fund it the way it's supposed to be funded, this graph doesn't happen. And that's a different analysis than what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to see, do we have the policy infrastructure in place to do it? Whether or not we're going to get there, DEQ and PUC have those 2 big lever programs, HB 2021 and CPP, and they're going to be very involved in making sure that we do get there. But they would also need to be heavily involved in a conversation about where we are today and how we're going to get to where we need to get to. Hopefully that answers.
Maybe just to put a finer point on it, because, you know, people are more or less familiar with what we mean when we say sector-based inventory. The sector-based inventory does not include the land sector. So this is really
Right.
all the sectors except the land sector, which will be captured and addressed in our natural climate solutions or natural and working lands efforts. So ideally, we will be able to bring together all of the different inventories, including the 3rd inventory, the consumption-based inventory, as we consider recommendations that we make, and to look across them to see what our potential is for meeting our goals through a combination of efforts through natural and working lands and the sector-based strategies. When we developed the natural and working lands proposal in 2021, our 2050 goal was about 9 million metric tons of increased net sequestration. And that was about the gap that we had when we did that earlier analysis in the sector-based inventory. So it did look like a net zero was possible, you know, with this additional, you know, we'll have to consider what is accomplishable in the land sector that might help us meet a net zero 2050 goal, as well as additional measures in the sector-based work to get us where we need to be.
Great. Thank you for that context.
Is there another hand up?
Commissioner Apter and Commissioner Lim have their hands up, Chair.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Apter?
Thank you. I mainly just wanted to echo Rep. Gamba's comments. I do have one technical question, but on Rep. Gamba's comments, I think, as you mentioned, Alan and Chair McDonald, lifting up the assumptions and the critical role of implementation was a really big piece of TIGR 1.0. And just want to underscore, I think that's all the more important in TIGR 2.0, especially given that we now have the benefit of having these cornerstone programs and policies in place and have a better sense of what the challenges and barriers are and what that means for progress toward achieving these policies. And I think that on the implementation piece, what we also called out in the initial roadmap was not just saying implementation is important and enforcement is important, but what are the complementary policies that can help address those barriers to staying on track? And we now have the benefit of the soon to be published energy strategy. So I think the more that we can call back to the recommendations there and lift up, again, there are solutions to support implementation and just being explicit in exactly what Alan said. This is a model of success, but success is by no means guaranteed. And just really making that very, very clear will be critical. My one technical question was actually going way back to the industrial source emissions and assumptions there. And I think maybe I misheard, but I thought what was said was that this was the industrial regulation was based on an assumption that facilities have the opportunity to choose what they do to reduce emissions. And I wasn't sure if that was referring back to the previous CPP BEAR regulation versus the forthcoming rulemaking and regulation on EITs.
So we modeled the new CPP regulations, which included industrial, the big industrial customers in the state, and so they're going to be covered under the CPP. So we modeled their emissions reducing. How they do that, we don't know. They don't either, nor does the DEQ. But over time, they'll have to meet those specific requirements. So they'll get to choose how they do it, but they still have to get there.
After, does that, do you have any follow-on comments you want to make relative to choices that might be made? Or
yeah, and happy to maybe chat offline too. And I'm sure you've, I know you've heavily consulted with DEQ. Thank you for the 30+ meetings you referenced earlier, Alan. That's a lot of time and effort, so thank you. Yeah, it does seem a little bit tricky to some extent to model that, given the regulations have yet to be defined. And I understand it's within the parameters of the overall decreasing cap. So I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, again, maybe go to the next slide, please, Jen. This modeling doesn't tell us how we get there. It just says we're going to. And just to put a finer point on it, the two big lever programs, CPP and HB 2021, that's where the action needs to be. The enforcement and making sure that we meet those two big umbrella programs with a heck of a lot of actions we don't know yet exactly how we're going to do, are critically important, because they represent 97+% of the emissions reductions in trying to get to our goals. And we're now, because of CAFE, a good example of changing one program, how fragile this is. One program change at the federal level and we don't meet our goals anymore. So now we have to make that up somewhere else with other kinds of programs beyond CPP and HB 2021.
thank you, Alan. Commissioner Lim?
I'd like to see if we can go back to the transportation sector for a couple of minutes. And again, I think this is, again, really, really sophisticated, in-depth work. Maybe just stay at the policy slide. Maybe that's the best way. So it's great to see sort of the whole range of policies and sort of, the wedge analysis as you're showing here. In some ways, this is why I actually think the VMT discussion can be a distraction. But just for the sake of clarity, let me just sort of repeat what I heard you say, Alan. What I heard you say related to VMT was that VMT is related to the options that we give people for travel. And particularly in the urban areas, if we have multiple multimodal options for travel, including transit and other things, then, the per capita VMT goes down. What I was trying to point out with just like a shorthand bullet saying reduce VMT is that we don't want to give the impression that we are restricting people's travel, especially in the areas of the state where there aren't other options. So I think that's, often the misunderstanding is, the more options are for people who live in the urban areas oftentimes. So the phrase can sort of be misunderstood as restricting travel, which is really, I hope, not what we're trying to say. So that's just
That's correct.
That's my
not what we're
understanding
saying.
based on what you said. Yeah. So I appreciate that, as a clarification and confirmation. The wedge slide is particularly, important. We know the transportation sector is one of the largest, if not the largest sector for emissions. And so it's good to sort of see how much this is breaking out. And I take your point about the change in the federal policy. I guess my question, if I were to frame it this way, is, if, say, the federal CAFE standard, as you're pointing out, is not going to go forward as we might have assumed, in an earlier, analysis, how much room is there within the state programs and activities and investments? If you can go back to that slide again, related to the other smaller transportation wedges, you point out clean cars, clean trucks, clean fuel standard for transportation. How much room do we have in terms of state actions, maybe? And that would seem to me maybe a helpful thing to comment on if you could, because I know, like in the last legislative session, there were some ideas being talked around, like what can the state do in the environment where the federal policies are changing?
Yeah, and again, going to the fragility of all of this, advanced clean cars in particular is a good example of a program that is dependent on the waiver that that California was granted, and that's in litigation right now, and whether or not that goes away will have a big impact on whether we meet that. Jen, can you go to slide 36, the by sector slide? So the keep going. Keep going. The big keep going. Yeah, that one. So this is the wedge diagram, but instead of by program, it's by sector. You can see the two big wedges are the bottom in the dark blue is transportation, and the top one, electricity. So to your point, Commissioner Lem, those are critically important to be able to reach our goals. If we don't have those programs in place, it makes it very difficult for us to do that. So the HB 2020 is around electricity, but all those advanced clean cars, advanced clean trucks, clean fuels program, CAFE standards all impact that blue section of transportation and make and so all of those things need to occur. There's no silver bullet here, as Bill McKibben said, it's silver buckshot. So all of these things in that transportation sector are multiple programs that get there, and we need to have them all. We don't want Tigger to turn into a hand-wringing skepticism document. We want it to be somewhat positive and show what the pathway is to get there. And a conversation about where we're at is a very good one. Representative Gamba said that we need to be cognizant of that if we're not sticking to what we've put in place, the programs and regulations already adopted, we're not going to get there. And right now, it's tenuous at best.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Lamb, I'll just add one last point that you were making about VMT, which we really appreciate. But for the shift in the VMT, at least as it relates to the TIGR analysis, we are referring to the CFEC program, the Climate Equitable and Friendly Communities. And that program only applies to populations of over 50,000. So
Urban.
That would also not, we would not be communicating that we should be limiting public transportation in smaller regions.
And because of the way Chris was showing the model that we could break out those urban areas that he had we can actually limit it to those areas and then build that up to get to the aggregate state. So that's an urban policy.
Yeah, and we will be sure to communicate that in the narrative of the report, which will be drafted in 2026. But thank you for that point, because it is really
It'll
important.
be good to make that as a comment in the public comment period, Commissioner Lem.
Exactly. Great. Other questions or comments? I think we have more slides.
Commissioner Washanuski has his hand up.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's fine to call me John W if you want, or Commissioner John. But it's pronounced va shoe, like a shoe on your foot, tin as in a tin roof, and ski as if you're gonna go skiing. So va shoe tin ski.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll call you Commissioner John W.
Yeah, thank you. Either one's fine. Just wanted to note too that I think we often kind of think of like transit or transportation alternatives as being either for urban community, those are for urban communities, and other strategies are for rural communities. But just wanted to note that rural communities depend on transit as well, and often have even more limited transit options than we do in urban areas. And just at a human scale, just how important those transit options are for people. It could be a trip to the doctor. It could be, going to see friends at the senior center or whatever. So there's just hopefully, and just one other comment about, Alan, you keep on talking about, I think rightly, about the fragility of our policy structure when it comes to reaching our climate goals. It kind of speaks to the importance of redundancy to sort of mitigate the fragility, and how, sometimes we're quick to say, well, why do we need a state policy when, the federal policy is going to help us get there or whatever. And I think it really, our current moment shows why those state policies and even local policies are really important to help, build upon and reinforce one another to get to some of these goals.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing about the importance of transit in rural communities. Maybe not relative to significant greenhouse gas emission reduction, but to your point, really important for meeting the needs of our rural populations.
Commissioner Dan T has his hand up.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan, for the assist. Commissioner Thorndike?
Yeah, sort of following up on, I think, both Professor Lim's and John W.'s comments and stuff on transit. So I'm, Medford, Rogue Valley, Jackson County area, and I'm pretty involved in following our transit situation. And like this also just accounts to things that happened that I don't think were planned, is, the big hit we've had with Rogue Valley Transit District, which was growing nicely and actually becoming a viable transportation choice, which is difficult down here. I mean, we have population concentrations, but then it's, it peters out pretty quickly. So it's a difficult market to get, but it was getting better and better. And then wham, the stopping of federal funding because of the sanctuary state nonsense stuff going on, just whacked. I mean, we just reduced the number of routes by half. Now they were very creative in terms of trying to minimize the impact of that, but I mean, it is currently devastating, and the numbers are surprising on the number of people who are then put out of the system in terms of coming in for medical, in terms of coming in for employment, they were more significant than you would think. And now people are filling in with various ride share programs and things like that. But all that means more cars going up. So you've got kind of an instant impact on that. So yeah, I really shouldn't, I guess it's 2 points. Is one, just emphasizing, it's not necessarily a small impact in an area like ours. And then also it's just one of those examples of something, I don't know how you model that and how long that's going, how long that kind of sort of, destructive, how long that has to last before it starts impacting the model, when it's something that wasn't contemplated at all, but it's had a tremendous impact. Hopefully it won't last. It's, that's part of the challenge, the legal challenges that are going on, but who knows? So it's kind of 2 points. There's the impact, and also how do you model these kind of really unanticipated, events? And
Yeah.
how long do they have to drag on before, you modify it? That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, and related to the Tigger project, can you quantify it? Because this is a quantification model. And if we can't quantify it, what you were talking about, Commissioner Thorndike, we can't really put it into the model. There's numerous things like that are going on that we don't really know how to quantify. And as the state of climate analysis and those kind of policies gets better, we'll be able to do that over time, be able to quantify them better. It's been a long time just to get at some of the things that we were talking about in Tigger 1.0 to be able to get somewhat better quantification of the greenhouse gas emission reductions from these programs.
Thanks.
Thank you. I know we have a few more slides to go through, but if there are any, and maybe we hold questions till we get through the rest of the slides and then come back.
That's good. Yeah, thanks for all that discussion. That's, you all bring up really good points, and there's lots of complexity, and we're showing you a graph that represents the whole state, and as I tried to kind of convey before, there's a lot of richness underneath that graph that we can, especially when we're looking at in the phase 2, maybe explore more. Like, the VMT question is a good one. There's definitely, not that, I wouldn't say, like you brought up, transit is really important in rural areas, but in urban areas, there's a lot more options than just transit too. So, you have different considerations in the location, and location matters. So that's why we try to bring kind of a more of a spatial dynamic to the modeling work that we provide to the people that we work with to try and kind of tackle this problem. And so transportation is a really good example of that. And there's lots of others too. Alan, we've kind of jumped around and seen most of the slides, and there's, Chair McDonald said there's 1 or 2 left, but what do you want to focus on here?
This is kind of an eye chart, but to Commissioner Lem's point that this is a math exercise, that there is quantification. We were talking about with Commissioner Thorndike as well, that the model does try to quantify all of these 16 different actions. Some of them are rolled up together, like building retrofits has multiple things in it, so does efficient buildings. But we're trying to quantify them in terms of what's the annual reduction in metric tons. And so the model be able to do that. But and again, the more important thing, next slide, please, is where do all these live? This slide's really important. In the upper right, if you just add up HB 2021 and CPP, that's 97%. The rest is 3. The graphic below that, all those other programs are important, and they're part of the quiver of the arrows in the quiver to combat climate change. But the real big lever programs are really important to focus on. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on the right things as we
I would also add too, those smaller ones, even though they're small, but they also give you foundation to keep building on to that, that would be rolled into like HB 2029 or rolled into CPP. Like they're all kind of contributing to that same goal, and you can use that as foundations for success and modification and growth in the future and application in different areas. So they're good building blocks as well.
And speaking of success, why don't you go to slide 37, Jen, the sector rainbow slide. So this is one of my favorite slides because it's cool in that you're gonna get there, Jen. Keep going. Next one. That one. So if we don't do anything, that's BAU, right? If we implement the programs that we've got on the books and the regulations, we get the BAP. That's a pretty dramatic drop off. That's another thing that Chair McDonald's talking about. There's success to be had here in that we do have this in place to be able to do it. We have to do it in order to get here, though. Whether or not we're going to be able to do that is different. There's two interesting things about this graph to me. One is the precipitous drop off in emissions, but if you go all the way up to 2050, you see what's left. You see that the transportation dramatically declines. You see that the industrial still there, but the food and or the residential drops off, commercial drops off, but food and ag is still there, and waste is still there, and industrial's still there.
Oh, sorry, that's weird. Those two, I'm not sure why that industrial. That's that. My bad.
Yeah, that's probably a different one.
Those are fugitive emissions. They'd be rolled up kind of more in industrial, but.
Yeah. Oh, okay, fugitive, the top one. Yeah, fix that. So it does. So this is a positive story in that the trajectory, we have the ability to get on the trajectory to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions dramatically. Whether or not we're going to do it is a different story. But Tigger is trying to say, if we do all this, where are we going to end up?
Yeah, and I guess just to point out those remaining, the yellow line, the remaining industrial emissions, those are non-combustion emissions. So those are process emissions, so emissions that happen because of the whatever's happening at the facility, releases emissions as part of the process and not of burning fossil fuels. So all of those have been removed based on the CPP kind of action, but the CPP doesn't address kind of non-fossil fuel related emissions. And then similarly, food and agriculture, there's no policies or actions that are on the books that we found that would influence that. So again, that's kind of why that wedge or that line kind of remains fairly unchanged. So those are kind of the two areas that are left to kind of work on to, if you're looking forward to get to that 2050 goal.
Right. And if you do the next slide, Jen, you want to describe that by fuel type?
Yeah. Yeah, so again, kind of similar story. Non-energy is made up of process emissions, can be made up of landfill gas, or agriculture. Livestock emissions would be another good example of some non-energy emissions. So those are all emissions that are coming from, again, not burning the fossil fuels, but related activities. Other activities. You can also see grid electricity. So lots of good comments about whether what the COUs are going to do with data centers and the emissions. And as Alan said, kind of we were as conservative as possible to see, if they were using kind of an unspecified electricity source, what would that look like? And so that's kind of where those grid electricity emissions come from. But most of the other emissions are, pretty much going to zero because of the programs and policies that, again, the CPP being the big one that going to zero. So. And I think that's kind of the last slide.
Any questions on all of the?
Any more?
We had a pretty robust discussion about it.
Representative Gamba?
Thank you. On that last slide, on the industrial piece.
Go back up, Jen.
The big, it doesn't seem to move at all. As a matter of fact, it gets bigger. Is that predominantly natural gas use for industrial processes? And if so, how are you measuring that? Are you measuring it as burned natural gas, or are you also including the escaped raw methane that is going to be included in the fact that they're using it?
So
Representative Gambo, which color bar are you?
Go, yeah, that one.
It's the big golden rod or yellow, whatever that is.
Yeah, so you can actually see that there's quite a bit of a reduction. Like if you look at the BAU portion of it, the yellow goes up quite a bit. But with a lot, data centers being grouped into industrial, I know there's some, it could be in commercial too, but we're putting them into industrial. So that part of the big increases from that. But the leftover is not from the burning of natural gas. So that is assuming that is being all reduced because of the CPP program. What is left over is emissions from that don't come from the combustion of fossil fuels. For like cement is a good example that I always have on the top of my mind. The drying of the materials for cement, during that process, CO2 actually gets released. So you're not burning anything, you're not doing anything like that. It's just that's part of the process of drying. CO2 gets released. So there's lots of other processes out there that actually release greenhouse gases, but they're not associated necessarily with the burning of the fuel. So even if you changed it even if you're using natural gas to generate the heat to dry that, or if you changed it to clean electricity, you would still get emissions if you don't capture them somehow or change your process or different things like that. So that's what that leftover yellow line is emissions from from processes that don't burn fossil fuels. Hope that clarifies it.
Yeah, thank you.
There questions before we go to kind of what's coming next?
And you got your 10,000 extra points, Chris, by saying process.
Yes.
Instead of process.
Always good to have Canadians on board, in my view.
I think it's a little less of a question, more just of a statement, and maybe tying back to the Director Brenner's earlier comments about the executive order for speeding along permitting for some of the renewable energy projects so they can take advantage of tax credits. I think one of the key challenges we have as a state is going to be deployment, because I think if we look at the history of renewables, battery technology, et cetera, it's really the deployment process that or process that leads to price reduction, and then is able to build that virtuous cycle of improvement. And one of the key factors there, I think, is deployment of renewable energy. And here, I think we need to think about both, allowing the market to, and market actors to deploy that energy, but also thinking about, well, how do we improve on the public sector side the way in which we permit and make approvals and flex and exercise our muscles around saying yes, to projects that we need to build in order to get to that abundant renewable energy future. Because, for example, there's technologies out there that can reduce process emissions or eliminate process emissions, but they require, large amounts of renewable energy to make them possible. So that's, we're already sort of facing some constraints and challenges around the amount of energy available for the energy needs we have today. So we really got to get past our current constraint moment and into a moment where we're kind of like firing on all engines and just letting energy come onto the system, renewable energy come onto the system in as many ways as possible, and getting over some of our challenges around transmission construction and land use issues and whatever else.
And that's a very good point, Commissioner. And that it takes a lot to bring online an energy resource, an electricity resource, and a lot of components. Siting is only one of them, but I will point out that there's almost 3 gigawatts of solar projects that are already permitted that don't have interconnection agreements, transmission, or power sales contracts. So those parts of the system are not allowing those 3 gigawatts of permitted stuff to go of solar to get online. So there's a lot of moving parts. Siting is only a small part of it. One of the things that we analyzed in the energy strategy was, what if we don't get the transmission and the ability to bring on these things online, especially the renewable resources, wind and solar and batteries. What we saw was that compared to the reference case where we did, it's a lot more expensive to not be able to do that. And we could still meet our greenhouse gas and reliability goals, but it costs us more. So handling all portions of that, bringing online a resource is important.
Thank you, Alan. And I appreciate you bringing up the other issues that are important in terms of consideration of bringing renewable energy online. And, you know, we have identified an intent to talk about that in an upcoming meeting and to dig into some of those other issues in more detail. So thank you. So let's move to next steps. And in the meantime, if Jan, if you can just look to see if we've got any public comments and get ready for doing that next after we talk about this.
No public comments today.
Thank you.
And Chair, I can jump in with this slide.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff Crook, Department of Energy. So as Alan mentioned earlier in this presentation, this project is really broken into two different phases. And this slide shares more on schedule. The phase 1 model forecast results presented today have an open comment period and now through October 31st. And the materials, the slides and assumptions report will be accessible on the Commission's October 10 website. And people can submit comments by October 31st through the Commission's email address shown here. And in addition, there will be a phase 2 that will be kicking off in January, which is really the gaps analysis of additional measures. And this really involves, again, looking at evaluating those additional actions that are needed to meet the state's GHG reduction goals. All this information and analysis will be compiled into a final report next spring. And there'll be an additional public comment opportunity that will be scheduled at that time. So with that, pass it back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to see the work ahead. And I just want to emphasize how important House Bill 3409 was prior to doing the Ticker 1.0, which, as Alan mentioned, we got outside grant funding through kind of a complex mechanism to do. We really had only had, as far as I know, one forecast, and it was from, I think, data from 2016 and maybe published in 2018 as part of some of the work that DEQ was doing. But having regular forecasts to be able to help check not just, you know, what our emissions are today, but what we think we can do with the policies we've got and what are the gaps is just super important. And this project, as well as the first ticker analysis, I think has been a kind of a game changer for what the Commission can do and how we can focus our attention and help provide the right recommendations to the legislature and collaborate with agencies. So I'm really excited about what we're learning and humbled by the challenge that we still have in front of us to make this all work. So thanks to Odo staff and SSG for the great work and the really thoughtful considerations that have been going into this, and also really appreciate the comments that commissioners brought to the table today about how we need to be really careful about messaging and delivery of the information that we have. So more to come on that in our final next steps. So if there are any other closing comments on this agenda item, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can just look at our next steps. So in our November meeting, we have a number of deliverables that are underway on the natural climate solutions work. We'll have draft findings on the land-based net carbon inventory and the workforce, natural climate solutions workforce. We will hear more about the Oregon energy strategy. In December, we'll hear kind of final products on the natural climate solutions inventory and workforce. We'll hear where things stand with the comprehensive climate action plan that the Oregon Department of Energy and DEQ are working on, and we have to dig in deeper on transportation policies and approaches that are underway to address climate. In January, we'll talk more about the phase 2 of the TIGR work. We'll also learn about kind of the metrics piece of the natural climate solutions effort, the activity base and community impact metrics project, which will be just kicking off. We had talked about digging in on transmission, and we may want to expand that conversation to talk more broadly, as it was brought up earlier today, about barriers relative to implementation of House Bill 2021, kind of more broadly. That could happen in December or January. And then, one of the things I'm excited about for our January meeting is really starting to frame our biennial report to the legislature and really using that to help think about our work plan for 2026. Our next biennial report is due in December of next year. And, as we talked about today, communicating that is going to be the messages we want to send are going to be really important, and making sure that the commission has time to consider and integrate all the good new information that's coming to us from the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, TIGR 2.0, the energy strategy, the natural and working lands results, as well as some of the conversations that we've had with local agencies around what local communities need in terms of help, as well as the continuing conversations we plan to have on how to engage, how to support tribal priorities and through our report. So those are some of the things that are on my mind in terms of important things to think about in our next biennial report. And I'm hoping we can really kind of dig into what that biennial report might look like, and then use that to backcast where we should be spending our time and attention. The other, I think, really important topic that I see in our, near future is to talk about data centers. And I think Commissioner Dotson raised a point in our August meeting, I believe, talking about, policies and how those might be applied to different types of data centers. And there's an important intersection, not just on our energy load, but on energy cost with the increase in demand from data centers. So I think that's another topic that we might want to look at early in 2026. So that's kind of what we have envisioned about next steps, but love to hear from others on the commission, what kinds of things came up for you today or that you've been thinking about that we might want to prioritize for future discussions. Thank you. I don't see any.
I'm new here, so I really appreciate the conversation today. I thought it was really insightful, or I learned a lot. I think it kind of overlaps with an earlier meeting that the commission was having, in the sense of like what's going on at the local level with sustainability offices, because there's that gap, there's that little persistent, and there's those persistent gaps, even if we are able to implement the state policies. And I think that's a good place for where some of our local partners can come in to, assist in making this fragile policy environment a little bit more redundant, a little bit strengthened.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do think we also probably should prioritize some follow-on work with local communities. We got a great sampling, but as we explored who might present to the commission on local efforts to address climate, it was clear to us that there were a lot of additional folks would be beneficial to hear from, and so that might be something that we should follow up on in terms of thinking about another area of focus for a subset of our commission. Any other comments for the good of the order?
McDonald, I'll just chime in. I think that looks like a really excellent tentative plan. I'm really glad to see transportation on the agenda for December. And I think it would make sense to expand or maybe add on to the transmission conversation, as you said, to have a broader discussion of barriers to clean energy deployment. But I'm a little torn because I do think transmission deserves a standalone agenda item and conversation. And yeah, appreciate you flagging the need for a standalone discussion on data center challenges as well sometime in early next year. But thanks for all the work in pulling that together. I think it looks great.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. And yeah, I mean, I thought, I will have to say, this has been one of my favorite meetings of the commission, because we got to really dig into a single project and really raise a lot of questions and have a lot of rich back and forth. So I agree with you, Commissioner Apter. We don't want to, we aren't served by kind of diluting topics down to the point where we really can't dig in deeply enough. So we'll try and balance that with making sure that we have time to really dig in on the topics we pick. Representative Gamba?
Yeah, I want to echo Commissioner Apter's comments that she just made, and put a little finer point. I attended the Regional Energy Symposium yesterday, as did I think a couple other people in this meeting. That's a very natural gas focused conversation, but I think the utility of it was that there's also a recognition of the serious lack of resource adequacy headed our way, broadly speaking. And the way the natural gas industry is playing that is, so of course we need more pipelines and more peaker plants to be able to meet that resource adequacy. But there was enough recognition in the room that part of the problem is that we're not building out the clean energy that we need to create that sort of base load below the peaks to start with. And I think that's something that needs to be capitalized and reiterated and broadcast to the general public and the legislature and the leadership, is that we are still failing to actually build out. We're 47th in the nation in building out green energy. That needs to be fixed. And the sort of new attitude that's growing around the nation of, environmentalism for years and years and years has been about no. It's been about stopping things. It's been about keeping things from happening for good reason. But it's time for us to shift into a much more aggressive attitude of yes, and sort of overcoming some of our built-in protections when it comes to siting, permitting, things like transmission and clean energy projects, so that we can start to get back up to speed on delivering those. And I think a piece to that is going to be need necessarily a teeth to 2021. Because I don't think the utilities on their own are going to do this. And I think there's going to have to be a more significant push. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is I think the resource adequacy question scares a lot of our natural opponents. And it's causing them to maybe lean in a little more on that we should be building out more resources quickly. And I think there's an opportunity there for those to be green energy resources. And I don't know how to encapsulate all that into something, but transmission is one of the bottlenecks, right? Where, as
Absolutely.
I put in the notes earlier, the governor's EO was wonderful. Unfortunately, it doesn't affect Bonneville, and Bonneville is the bottleneck. That's why none of those projects are going to get any tax breaks, because Bonneville is not going to get them their interconnections in time.
That's a super hard challenge we talked about in August, I believe. So thanks for raising that again. Commissioner Waszutynski, how'd I do?
Oh my gosh, nailed it. 100%.
Awesome.
Thank you. I would just, I think Representative Gamba brings up a great point. I think another important point is that we already have a distribution system, an electrical distribution system, and thinking about how we maximize utilization of the existing system. Because, capacity issues are just like, they're not, 24 hours, 7 days a week. They're, maybe an hour a month or something. We should understand that a little bit better too. And just thinking about, what kind of solutions are out there that can help us, improve utilization of the infrastructure we already paid for.
Thank you for that. Okay, final comments?
Public comment on Tigger 2.0 ends October 31st. So please get in any comments that you have.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate that. And with that, I'll go ahead and close the October 10th, 2025 meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission. And again, I just want to thank staff and our consultants at SSG for the really great work, as well as commissioners for digging in. I'll just, other reminders, if you are interested in participating in a discussion with the Sustainability Board and a few members thereof about future agenda items and collaboration, let me know. And thank you, Commissioner Waszutynski, for saying you're interested in engaging in that. And then also, if you're willing to or interested in participating on the Natural Climate Solutions Committee, also let me know. And that one in particular, if you can let me know by noon on Monday, with the earlier one, the collaboration with Oregon Sustainability Board by next Friday. We appreciate that, and we can move forward on getting those efforts going. So thank you again. And with that, the meeting is closed.